I'm Vanessa Tyler. Welcome to Sarder TV, an idea-sharing platform founded by Russell Sarder, author, investor, and CEO of Netcom Learning. Is your business agile enough to shake off any disruption? If not, learn how to get it back on track with Leo Tilman, CEO and author of the book Agility. Leo Tilman, thank you so much for coming in and joining us. Tell us about your success journey.
I've been very fortunate. I came to Wall Street in the early 90s, and I was part of that generation of physicists and mathematicians who came to bring the entirely new perspective on finance and risk. And when I describe that time period, it's almost like I'm describing being an applied scientist who comes to work every day and you talk to your colleagues and you say, have you read this scientific paper or that scientific paper? And you almost would forget that you are in a real company doing real work. But it's been an incredibly exciting intellectual period where risk management and finance became a fully developed scientific discipline. And I've continued working on a lot of these themes for quite some time.
That's fascinating, how to approach business from the scientific angle of it. And as you said, it hasn't been done before.
Well, it was quite revolutionary at the time. It's amazing. It's been so many years since then. But as all of these models and experiences have been developed and perfected over the years, the challenge became not necessarily to continue developing these super sophisticated models, but to apply them in new ways. So one of the biggest challenges that has persisted ever since was to connect risk management and financial modeling to the way that boards of directors and executives make decisions.
And again, you've been credited with shaping the modern concept of risk intelligence. When did you first focus on this concept? When did it first hit you, this is the way we should kind of look at things?
It's a direct outgrowth of what we just discussed, where everybody understood the importance of managing risk and thinking about it. But that scientific discipline was so disconnected from the way that senior executives and leaders thought about the business and thought about economics and finance. And there was an additional angle where the way risk management evolved, it became almost a policing function, something that you perceive that is impeding your objectives and impeding progress. So you needed to reposition it. And the way you would think about it is you look to other corporate disciplines that became really, really useful. So competitive intelligence, business intelligence, political intelligence, all of these disciplines that are specifically used to understand the environment and make better decisions. So risk intelligence was an attempt to take risk management and all of the sophistication and experience that it offered and reposition it into something that is no longer perceived as being defensive and backward-looking and policing and more strategic and decision-oriented. And that definition really became popular since then in repositioning that field to be practically useful to executives.
Forbes named you as a business visionary. How do you see ahead during uncertain times?
One of the biggest takeaways from this book is that human beings are really, really bad at predicting things. So it's really not about prediction, but it's really about real careful study of our environment, understanding of the trends that are shaping the future, and in detection rather than prediction. So we spend a lot of time in the book sort of articulating that difference, that we really should not be sitting around and predicting things, because it's A, we're bad at it, and B, it's really dangerous to do. Instead, if we spend time studying, planning, and envisioning, then we will be really able to react when the time is right.
It's almost a formula that's been set up that you can plug?
No, it's not a formula, because formulas are dangerous in their rigidity. So instead, when you look at some of the most successful theories by Clausewitz about war and others, they're articulated as being aid to judgment, right? The onus on really thinking about the environment and making decisions still on you, the decision maker. But there are tools in both analytical and theoretical that help you make these better decisions and help you better understand the environment, and this is one of them.
Why did you write Agility, and who would benefit most from your book?
So it's not a surprise that every single executive conversation, every board of directors meeting across industries globally is focused on the overwhelming disruption that is taking place. This disruption is due to technological revolution, geopolitical changes, societal changes. So everybody is struggling to understand, how do we as an organization better learn how to navigate this disruption, because another common theme is that we only see in the beginning of it. It's going to dramatically intensify. So what do we do? And of course, across different industries, across different sectors, including in the military, the answer to that is always, we should become more flexible and dynamic and nimble and also agile. And nobody quite knows what that means. There's never been, none of these terms have been formally defined. Nobody explained the true difference between what it means to be nimble versus flexible versus adaptable. And agility has become, as one of the leaders who worked with us on this book called, a buzzword. Everybody loves it, everybody sort of nods, but nobody quite knows what that means. And in my co-author, General Chuck Jacoby, who was commander of NORAD and Northern Command, commanded hundreds of thousands of people in different military conflicts, saw exactly the same thing in the military. So when we met and we started to work together, we really came to a realization that there needs to be a comprehensive approach. And the approach, for it to be useful, has to be all a theory of what agility means and what it means to be agile as an organization, but there also has to be a practical way to go into any organization, ascertain how agile it is, and make it more agile. So almost a whole new language was developed in defining agility, defining the kinds of qualities that require to cultivate it in the organization, but also a very practical process of how you would go into it.
It's interesting you mentioned that your co-author is someone in the military, because I noticed a lot of war references and references to war, which is interesting that you made that connection, but you see that as necessary because that's really where you can get examples of being agile, being in the theater of war.
So the military thinking is important in a variety of ways. Not just, there's certainly the most amazing examples of agility, and we can talk more about it. One being the invasion of Normandy, something that we just celebrated the 75th anniversary of. But the military thinking is important in a number of ways. First and foremost, there's the famous theory of war introduced by Clausewitz that describes the mechanism of all competitive environments as shrouded in what he called fog and friction. Fog is the fact that we can't truly see what's going on. We try to really study our environments and understand, but at the end of the day, there's so many forces at play that it's hard to know. So we need to accept the fact that we not always have full understanding of what's going on. And secondly, there's uncertainty. And things happen, and accidents happen, and they build on each other, and they cause chain reactions. That also needs to be taken into account. So one major contribution of the military thinking to this subject is really helping us understand the nature of the environments in which we operate. So again, just like with agility, everybody talks about so-called VUCA, volatility, ambiguity, complexity, uncertainty. But what does that really mean? Right? Okay, these are all the right words to describe the environment that we operate in, but what does it mean? What are the mechanisms that create all of that? And more importantly, how do you operate in environments like these. So that was one big area. The second area goes back to Napoleon, which is when you study military history, and of course my co-author knows it infinitely better than I do, you notice that one of the major contributors to success of Napoleonic wars early on was a very interesting culture that Napoleon developed in his armies. He was the one who had the vision of what he wanted to achieve. He and his general made a huge effort to plan for this. But from that point on, people were really empowered to make independent decisions and react to quickly changing circumstances. That magical combination of top-down planning and strategy and bottom-up empowerment and trust is what has been cultivated for the past 200 years. It was Clausewitz who described it. And now US military has adopted it as a major operational doctrine. So this doctrine called mission command, which is really powerful and almost second nature now to US Armed Forces, became a very important element of describing what organizational settings and qualities are needed to achieve agility.
It requires a lot of trust in the employees and maybe giving up a little power as well.
Both. And that's critically important.
Yeah.
We talk so much about the dangers of micromanagement, for instance, and how micromanagement is absolutely incompatible with agility. But you raise a hugely important point. If you want your organization to be agile, you need to explain to it what you want as a leader and what your vision for the organization is, and that vision would include the moral component of it, of who we are and what we do and how we do things, but also the strategy, where we want to get to and why. But from that point on, if you want to really empower your people, you need to be tolerant to honest mistakes and setbacks, and you want to treat them as opportunities for learning. And one thing that makes it all possible is trust. So we spend so much time talking about the importance of trust throughout every single one of these components of agility.
Is there any planning in the concept of agility?
So one of the common misconceptions when people just casually talk about agility and then periodically make it synonymous or sound synonymous to speed or adaptability is this notion that it's all about fast inborn reflexes. Okay? You see something, these reflexes kick in, and you're great at thinking on your feet and reacting, etc. And that's not at all agility. It's not at all, at least in the way we describe it. To us, agility is the ability to plan and think and understand the environment so that when things happen in real time, all this planning, all this thinking enables you to make really smart decisions in that moment. But in order for you to be able to do that, you need to have worked on these things for quite some time. So it comes almost counterintuitive that on the one hand, you want to react quickly. On the other hand, that it's a function of planning. And also, of course, in business, we all know that if you're too rigid in the way that you are following a plan, you'll probably go off a cliff. So all of this needs to be balanced.
It kind of reminds me of somebody riding a skateboard for some reason. You know, you think the person's really agile, but they've been practicing a while.
So the sports analogies are super important. And one of the sports that is often used to describe agility is parkour, right? Because it has all of these elements. First of all, it's the true understanding of the environment. Secondly, it's the ability to use your environment to your advantage. So what could be considered to be an obstacle could be a way that you get to the next level. So, but again, it requires not going at this huge speed and making these decisions in the moment. It requires planning, envisioning, thinking about how I'm going to use this all of the obstacles and features of the environment to my advantage. So we spend a lot of time talking about the fact that agile organizations are capable of understanding and shaping the environment to their advantage.
Risk assessment and how it fits in.
So risk is important to agility in a number of ways. And the first part of it is the fact that understanding your environment is a study of risk. In finance, we know that there are a million of scenarios you can envision, and you can try to plan for some of them, but it becomes a very, very difficult task. Thinking about risk and what kinds of risks you're exposed to and why, and planning based on that makes it almost easier, because there are smaller number of risks than all imaginable scenarios that you can think of. So when we think about fighting for risk intelligence or developing situational awareness, which is the very first step of agility, risk is the framework and the way of thinking that enables you to understand your environment better. Once you've understood your environment and you've interpreted what's going on and you want to shape your response to change, risk comes back again, because now you have to understand your options with respect to their goals and their risks and what capacity and resources you have. So something that we call strategic calculus that involves the goals, the risk, and resources comes into play. Last but not least, now you've decided on the course of action and you want to implement it. Risk comes back again, because part of what we call levers involve financial actions, strategic actions, organizational actions, but risk is part of that too, because your ability to change how much risk you take in the process and of what kinds is a huge part of your arsenal of tools. As a matter of fact, we argue that your decisions on how much risk you want to take in the process is one of the most powerful levers that are available to you. So risk permeates the entire process of agility, from understanding your environment, shaping smart decisions, and actually executing.
Why is change really an opportunity?
Well, first of all, we cannot stop change, and we cannot deny change. So change is happening. So the only question is, how do we react to it? We talk about the fact that evolutionary extinction of companies happens when they either deny change, or don't notice change, or don't respond to it in productive ways. So then the question becomes, how do we cultivate an organization that is capable of detecting, assessing, and reacting to change, knowing that many other organizations won't be able to do that? So if we teach ourselves how to best respond to change, to us, change is an opportunity. To them, change is an existential threat.
Again, it goes to the mindset issue you talked about.
So the word mindset that you just brought up is hugely important for this entire process of agility. And we describe it as a sequence. First, you need to acknowledge that agility is achievable and it's something that can be learned. But the second part of it is what you brought up, which is the mindset. You create the organizational mindset that permeates how we think about environments, how we make decisions, how we act on a day-to-day basis. And then when we combine the choice to be agile, the mindset and capabilities, that's when we become agile. And of course, from that point on, leaders must be absolutely vigilant in cultivating it and leading by example, because that can go away too. We all have seen companies who have demonstrated amazing examples of agility for a given dislocation in a given environment, and then promptly went out of business
And went
because
back
they could
into
not replicate the same kind of success. So again, we describe this as an evolving, living state of being that needs to be nurtured, that needs to be very carefully attended to, but that can be achieved.
You've talked about this, but risk, in your opinion, is not a threat. And you talked about how it's throughout this entire process. Risk is always there, and it shouldn't be perceived as a threat.
We talk in the book about the natural duality of these conversations. Whenever you talk about risk, the first reaction is risk is really bad and we need to mitigate it and avoid it. But in the same sentence, everybody always says nothing worthwhile can be achieved about risk. So we always talk about the fact that risk is dangerous, but nothing can be achieved without risk. And the next set of conversations is that risk and opportunity are somehow linked in all of our minds, and we sort of know this. So this comes very natural to business people and financial professionals, because risk is almost like a lever, right? It's not naturally positive, it's not naturally negative. Too much risk is super dangerous. Too little risk will not enable you to achieve your objectives. So it has to be dialed just right. And of course, it's the role of senior leaders to really think about what that means. So when we talk about risk management and risk intelligence, it's all the tools that help you as a leader to make these really hard decisions. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's done under uncertainty. Information is always incomplete. So it's your role as a leader to really figure it out and think about it. So this is one of those tools.
You mentioned leader. Who is the leader in a really agile company? What are some of the things, the traits that he or she must possess to be there at the top? You talked a little bit about vision, talked a little bit about trust. So
fascinating set of conversations about the role of leadership and culture in all of this. One of the challenges, I think, in shaping the framework for agility or having these conversations in general is that these worlds of academic literature and practitioner literature are really segmented. You know, there's this entire genre of leadership and culture, and then there's strategy, and then there's finance, and then there's risk, in military, etc. And these are not often connected. So you can talk a lot about leadership, but not really talk about how that affects strategy, or the other way around, how the best strategy could be really hampered by the lack of leadership or a poor culture. So we try to unify all of this. And from that perspective, the role of leader or a commander is indispensable. You know, there are only certain things that leaders can do. You mentioned vision. Only they can develop the true vision for the organization and make sure that it's viable for the environment at hand. Only they can visualize the entire plan for the whole organization, how multiple lines of business and campaigns and initiatives all come together. And U.S. military really emphasizes that role of a leader in visualizing how the entire thing is going to unfold, and how if something unexpected happens, you will create a new line of offense or divert resources in certain ways. Only leaders who have the entire responsibility and understand the entire picture can do that. So that's the role of vision and planning in that. But the equally important role that they play is to create the culture and organization in the next generation of leaders who can then take all of that and really go and execute and implement. And of course, all of these folks at different organizational levels will encounter their own surprises and obstacles and challenges and opportunities. So they too need to be agile, just in different ways. So the role of a leader is to create this vision and planning, but then create the culture, knowledge, and the setting where others can be agile too. And that will require them to be properly trained, properly motivated, but also trusting that their colleagues and their leaders got their back.
How does technology, which of course we all need to embrace, really add to this need for being agile?
So on the one hand, technology is the disruptor. So when we talk about changes in the environment and disruption of industries, geopolitical issues, societal issues, technology is front and center in it. So as one of the major drivers of environmental changes, we truly need to understand what this fourth industrial revolution really means and what it entails. And again, as you and I discussed, a lot of it is the fact that it's only going to intensify the changes in technology and across different fields. It's not just the artificial intelligence and robotics that everybody is talking about. It's nanotechnology, it's virtual and augmented reality, it's gene editing that are going to fundamentally transform so many facets of our lives. So technology is a major driver of environmental changes, and we need to study it as such. Technology also enables us to better understand our environment. So in the process of agility of detecting, assessing, and responding to change, technology has a major role to play in helping us understand what is going on. At the same time, technology is used by our adversaries to disrupt a lot of what we do. There are cyber attacks, there is disinformation, there is propaganda on social media. Again, technology is now used to impair our understanding of what's going on or misdirect us. So it comes in many different ways. It helps us fight for intelligence and better understand what's going on. It disrupts our processes. It's used as a disinformation tool and a tool of warfare in cyber terrorism and cyber warfare. So it has many different applications. And again, we need to really conceptualize it. One of the ways to do it is to describe what it means to be agile and then really deconstruct how technology fits into each one of these areas.
People usually don't like change. How do you combat these emotional reactions when trying to get employees to be agile in a company?
One of the jokes we make is that Clausewitz, who lived 200 years ago, probably deserved a Nobel Prize in economics. In the same way Daniel Kahneman and others won it for behavioral finance, because they all describe very, very similar things. Clausewitz talked about the fact that inaction is native to human mind and progress is an exception. Kahneman talked about the fact that it's deeply evolutionary for us to resist change and dislike change and treat potential benefits of change as not as valuable or not as attractive as potential disadvantages. So overcoming it is a hard endeavor. And it again goes back to the leadership and positioning our responses to change as the way we do things, the way we are as an organization, but also creating the appropriate mindset and empowering folks and creating that trust. So a lot of the themes that we discussed are specifically designed to explain why change, the role of change in our environment, to explain how we deal with change, and then empower folks so that they're comfortable making decisions knowing that it may not work out, and that's okay.
What is top brain and bottom brain?
So one of the very well-known neuroscientists who we know wrote a book a number of years ago called Top Brain, Bottom Brain. And in the book, he disputed the common view that some people are left-brained and some people are right-brained. And instead, he said, there's no scientific evidence for describing it that way. But there is scientific evidence to talk about the top brain and the bottom brain. And top brain serves very specific functions like planning and vision and things like that, and directing execution. And bottom brain is how we understand our environment and how we perceive and detect results of our actions. And of course, the two constantly interact, right? So we create a plan, we put it into action, some doesn't work out, we receive the feedback saying, our plan just didn't work out. So we reshape the plan. Or if we're stubborn enough, we'll just continue doing what we're doing. So organizations operate in exactly the same way. So a number of years ago, that scientist, his name is Stephen Kozlin, who was at Harvard and Stanford and a number of other places, and myself wrote a paper called Brain as a Business Model. And we talked about the fact that organizations operate very much in the same way. They have top brains who make plans, and create vision and direct execution. They have bottom brains, all of the indispensable professionals who execute things and watch what happens in the environment and report back. So we use that analogy to really explain what is the division of labor between senior leaders at different organizational levels. It could be the CEO, it could be the leader of a team. And what is the role of everybody else and how the two need to interact. So we use a lot of examples in the book to show that how indispensable both are to agility. How if you have the top brain who makes the most brilliant of plans and then refuses to listen, like was the case of John Corzine at MF Global, then really bad things happen. And vice versa. If the top brain sort of checks out, doesn't create a plan, and says, okay, bottom brain, go and make your own plan, that doesn't work out as well because the bottom brain is not capable of serving the functions of the top brain. Amazingly enough, the Vietnam War was an example of the top brain not having a vision and outsourcing these functions to the bottom brain. And each of the components, each of the silos in the bottom brain did an amazing job. They fought hard, they used everything at their disposal to win every single battle, and then they lost the war. Right? And we use other examples where both parts of the brain are sort of discontinued or not as active and not as productive as they should be. So Citigroup, circa before the bailout in 2008, is an example of that. So we use this analogy to really illustrate what it takes for an organization to really detect changes and navigate really complex environments. So one of the examples that we use of a company that really did that well at a certain period of time is the way that Goldman Sachs navigated the financial crisis of 2008 and 9.
Talk about some of the other agile companies that you've experienced and worked with.
So we try to use a variety of historical and business case studies. The invasion of Normandy to us was an ultimate example of agility, both strategic and tactical. Everybody focuses on the actual D-Day invasion and the heroism and amazing perseverance and improvisation of the American soldiers. We just celebrated 75th anniversary of that. And all of that is absolutely true, and we highlight it in great detail in the realm of tactical agility, because they've encountered so many surprises and so many obstacles and setbacks, and yet they were unified around their mission. They were empowered, they were trusting their colleagues and their leaders, and they persevered, and that changed the course of history. But that preceded by many years of strategic agility, where American leaders essentially determined that they could not coexist with Nazi Germany, unlike the leaders of the Soviet Union. They transformed the entire US economy into the arsenal of democracy. They created enormous amount of innovation, and then they prepared for D-Day. So again, top-down vision, planning, really concerted effort that only senior leaders can do, then transitioned into amazing tactical agility. So the two work together. We present a number of other business studies. We show how movie company IMAX dramatically transformed itself and essentially overcame what many consider to be an existential threat in the digital world to a company whose projectors were the size of a fridge. We also talk about Western Union, which has been in existence for 150 years and has gone through, telegraph and then telephone and then the internet and now the digital age, and how that company transformed itself to really become a player in this new world when everybody was doubting that the company would even survive. So, but again, every time we use these examples, we return back to the question. These are the steps. These companies detected change, they assessed it, they shaped the response, they executed. Are they prepared to do it again? Have they embedded all of these steps and all of these qualities in their leaders, in their culture, in their processes, and their knowledge, so they can do it again and again and again. Because one of the major requirements for agility is to be able to repeat this process as the next disruption occurs, as the next change occurs, as the CEO leaves, as the culture changes.
Some more examples. What can you tell us about the collapse of Bear Stearns, and what did the leadership there do wrong?
We start one of the chapters in the book talking about what business you as a company are in. And we use a variety of examples, from Google to General Motors to the Iraq War. But this chapter starts with an example of Bear Stearns and one particular meeting that happened in the summer of 2007, where the company's chairman and CEO, Jimmy Kane, gathered all the senior partners and discussed the fact that two major hedge funds that were run by Bear Stearns blew up. And of course, there was a great deal of concern and conversation. And then he went out to claim that Bear Stearns is going to be just great as this crisis intensifies. Because, as he put it, Bear Stearns was in the moving business. It was not in the storage business. And by that, of course, he meant that Bear Stearns was a pure financial broker, just helping clients buy and sell things, as opposed to this complex financial institutions that has lots of derivatives and structured products on its balance sheet. And of course, it could not have been further from the truth in terms of the actual business model that Bear Stearns was in. So our point is that if you as a leader are confused about the business your company is in, that's probably a sure way to go out of business.
GM was another example. You pointed out its portfolio of risks and a mismatch between assets and liabilities. But how has that company changed today?
Again, in the same chapter, we use a variety of examples to show how a traditional view of what business a company is in could be different if you look at it from the perspective of risk. GM pre-bankruptcy being one of great examples of that. It was called a car manufacturer, it made cars, but its decisions were dramatically affected by the nature of its pension liabilities and healthcare liabilities. They were so large in proportion to other businesses, and they were so rigid because of the way that the company structured its contract, but it really affected business decision making. Its costs were exorbitant relative to its competitors. So from a traditional viewpoint, it was just a car manufacturer with lots of liabilities. From this other viewpoint, it was a healthcare and pension provider who just happened to make cars. And of course, we try to emphasize the fact that, again, you need to fully understand what business you're in and manage it accordingly, and envision what's next for that business accordingly.
What is a risk radar and how to create it?
So when we talk about the 3 steps of agility, detect what's happening in the environment, assess, and then respond, the detection part is hard because we need to understand what is the nature of our environment, what are the factors that matter to us. And as you and I talked in the beginning, one of the ways to do it is to say, instead of me thinking about every imaginable scenario and imaginable outcome, why don't I focus on the kinds of risks that I'm exposed to? Geopolitical, financial, strategic. And then I will monitor things that are relevant to that exercise. So the risk radar is one way in which a company can do that. The company can identify a variety of risks that are relevant to it in terms of future technological disruption, trade wars, economic cycles, operational breakdowns, regulatory changes, whatever the case may be. And then it can quantify and assess it, and then map it onto what are the kinds of things that could change in the environment that can truly affect our business. So risk radar is a construct that would come as a familiar concept to financial professionals, some of the business professionals, has been really expanded in this book to really help any organization conceptualize it, implement it in practice. But it takes it one step further, and it really talks about sort of a somewhat technical difference between risk and uncertainty. Because a lot of our exposures as an organization belong in the realm of risk. we could lose 30% of our stock market investment. What does that mean? But a lot of it lives in the realm of uncertainty. What if artificial intelligence evolves in a certain way that dramatically changes the entire landscape? Or what if breakthroughs in gene editing lead to people living dramatically longer? What would it do to the budgets of cities and governments and pensions and insurance and et cetera, right? So these are not risks, they're uncertainties, and they have to be conceptualized and managed very differently. So the book has a lot of big picture thinking and the framework for agility, but it goes into some of these very important technical details to really explain how to do it in practice.
Well, your book is fascinating. And thank you so much for coming and explaining how to become more agile. And I believe that this could apply to every company, from the largest corporation to someone trying to start maybe a business online or something.
Absolutely. So first of all, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you for your time and for your interest. We're very passionate about this book, naturally. General Jacoby and myself, we spent a lot of time thinking about it. We truly hope it will be of practical use. And as you said, it can be applied to any entrepreneur, to any team, to any organization. It can apply to us personally, right? Because we all are in the business of thinking about what this environment means to us and reacting on a daily basis. So the same principles, the same process applies to individuals as well. So our hope is that it reaches the broadest possible audience across sectors, government officials, military commanders, consultants and executives and entrepreneurs, and really makes a difference.
Excellent. Well, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching. Join us next time on Sarder TV, where creative thinkers come to share their ideas. I'm Vanessa Tyler. I'll see you next time.